Hello and welcome to Key Characters. Today I'm speaking with Paul Bettner and Katy Bettner. They are married, but that's not the most important thing about them. They're the co-CEOs of a game called Wildcard. So Wildcard's a kind of hybrid. It's a battler, it's an RTS, and it's got elements of collectible card game in it as well. So this is a great interview, in my opinion, and I really enjoyed talking to these guys. Wildcard's really interesting because they've put a lot of effort into making it a spectator sport as well as a game, and I hope you enjoy.
I'm Katy Bettner and co-founder and co-CEO of the Wildcard Alliance.
I'm Paul. I'm the founder and CEO, co-founder and co-CEO.
Oh, there we go.
I like when we both just say we're founder and CEO, and then people figure it out. That must mean that they're co-founder and co-CEO. But yes,
All right.
together with Kate, we started this company, 12 years ago now? The parent company is called Playful.
Parent company we started.
Yeah, which is like our production company that we have been using to build beloved IP and games now for over a decade. My own career goes back to Age of Empires. We also worked on Words with Friends together. So there's lots more we could talk about. But yeah, that's me.
Okay, so let's take a step back and can you explain to me in really simple terms what the game is?
Wildcard is a hybrid game. It's one of these games that is trying to create a new genre. It's not just a clone of something else. It brings together the aspects of games that we've worked on and the evolution of real-time strategy games from our work on Age of Empires and how RTSs have evolved through MOBAs and auto battlers. What we've always been working on, and this is the same core team that worked on Age of Empires, is the same team that's here together with me working on Wildcard today. And the way that we thought about doing that is let's take the elements of strategy that come from a real-time strategy game and let's fuse them together with some of these other games that we love to play, collectible card games, things like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, and also the action games that we were all playing at the time. These are like games like Overwatch and just our favorite kind of first-person shooter, Call of Duty, CSGO games. And we're like, what if we could create a game that had the immediate appeal and action accessibility of one of those games, but also secretly had the depth and strategy of these Age of Empires games? That was in 2017. Turns out that is a really hard thing to do.
I think the core piece that you forgot to say in this one is we realized really at kind of that early stage time that more people were watching other people play games than were actually playing games, right? Paul would say, oh, more people are watching people play games. And he would pull up like an esports event and I'd be like, why? Like, why would you I can't even tell what they're doing. I just see like flashes and that doesn't make any sense to me.
So stuff is happening and you're like, I can't make a head nor tail of this.
I come from Texas, which is very sporty kind of space. And I'm like, look, we have sports that have been tweaked to be very watchable. Why is that not what people are designing games towards? Is the ability for somebody like me, whose kids are going to make her sit and watch them play these games, to actually be able to enjoy the gameplay itself.
That moment that Katie's describing, by the way, that's when it started to work because we had this idea for this game we wanted to build and we knew what we wanted to experience as gamers. But like we've been building games now on these frontiers of technology when we started our first iPhone game company, created Words of Friends. We started one of the early VR companies, created Lucky's Tale, whatever. So we've become obsessed with building games on these technology frontiers. And we're always looking for that thing that can be magical and special about how we can take the game beyond what video games are today. And so with that idea of the game we were trying to build and the thing that Katie's mentioning, which is this vision of a new way to experience games, which is as a spectator, as a next generation spectator sport, that's when the formula for Wildcard came together.
Yeah. And it struck me as I was going through your personal histories that actually kind of reflects what you both bringing to the game, because Katy, you're from film production, that kind of screen world. And Paul, you're from game development.
We've always been back to back working and doing our thing. This is like a superpower thing that we have where we can speak for each other. We can know how the other one's going to react to something. And it was just fun. We actually really enjoy that.
I've watched the Malay on the Meteor production, the broadcast. I call it a broadcast because I'm old.
It is.
I actually ran a TV newsroom in New Zealand for a while, and I know how much work that production was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And so
I don't think I knew how much work that production was going to be until I had already committed.
Hats off to you guys for that. Doing stuff on the internet is sometimes like throwing a party and you don't know whether anyone's going to come. And I
Totally.
you guys put a shed load of work into that thing.
That was an experiment for us.
It was my big bet.
Yeah.
I was like, this is going to work.
Yeah. And trying to see that vision come to light and wondering if it was going to work. Like, we were hoping to elevate the experience of watching the game and the experience for the competitors themselves to something that was beyond what you would see in a traditional video game.
And that's what the point was. I don't direct film. I love to produce or to be in the executive position. I love finding new filmmakers. But if I had chosen a different life path, I would have directed theater. I'm lucky that Paul is great at everything's emotion and happy for him. And so he's great when it comes to shoutcasting that. And they understood the game, but it's about a feeling. And the whole idea behind this is to create this sense of being there, being together in a collective moment.
Yeah. It's fascinating. That's your odyssey and that's your quest, because that actually is a bigger thing than just gaming, because it's actually the thing that's missing from the internet, right? Is that sense of being in a place.
I think, I don't think I realized this until this moment, but the thing that has been happening for us, for Katy and I, as we've had this opportunity now to work together from these two worlds and bring them together like this and actually have that work, it's starting to happen across the industry. Last of Us, which I'm sure you enjoyed, I loved the game. And then I loved the
well done.
more. And when you watch the making of, what you'll see is that the director of the game and the showrunner of that show like loved working together. That collaboration is what made that show something that was respectful of the game, but also just great as a show. And I think Katy and I have dreamed about that opportunity for decades since we very first met, especially from the world that Kate comes from and the world that I come from. And Wildcard is the first moment that we're getting to do that together full time.
It's the future, right?
The other thing that we talk about all the time is so many metaverses that we've experienced that have showcased themselves as a metaverse. What they end up being is just a soulless social lobby. It's like,
we're trying to be nice, Paul. We're trying to be positive.
There's no reason to be there other than, hey, it's cool technology and we're all hanging out together. And I feel like the only metaverses that are actually going to succeed are going to be the ones that I'm there for a reason. And the reason is what Katy was mentioning, is some unique feeling that I want to have in my life. And so I go hang out there because that's why we're there. That's what that feeling is for.
I don't know if you guys have seen the stuff that Yuga Labs are doing, and they did that little excursion into their metaverse the other day.
Other side. Right?
Yeah, other side. And the thing that was a bit of a wake-up call for me was there was a lobby where there were about 7,000 people milling about, and they just looked like insects.
Yep.
I just
100% worst part of a party, like the worst part of it.
It's a tech demo, and I get that. And it's showcasing the improbable engine. As a game designer, that technology is cool, but it's really hard to solve for. Like, we don't typically have fun in environments where we're just standing around with 7,000 other people, unless we have some central thing that we're focused on.
That's why concerts do work. That's why when Fortnite brought in musicians and when these other metaverses, concerts can work.
And why Wildcard is designed as a venue that brings people together in a way that makes sense.
One thing I need to get clear, what is the blockchain integration in the game?
We mentioned earlier that for Wildcard, Web3 is actually the solution to a problem that we have been struggling with as we've been trying to see this vision come to life. We want to create an experience where the people who are tuning in to watch can actually show up in that experience live, can be a part of that. And ideally, we can create something, as Katy is mentioning, that creates an actual connection between those content creators and their fans. We've had this moment in our head from the beginning. What if Wildcard could have that moment that you find in the World Series where, like, at the end of the game, one of the winning players signs the baseball and tosses it up into the stands and a fan catches it? What if that could happen in Wildcard? And we actually started building some of the technology for this before I knew what a blockchain was. And then once we discovered, it was like, oh my gosh, Web3 is the technology. We need to make that moment come to life. And so for us, that's the answer of why is Wildcard a Web3 game? It's to deliver that vision.
Yeah.
It's a Web3 experience. I think that's the other thing, right?
Okay.
Is that the gamification of Web3, it's the way that we connect people to their data, the way that we connect people to each other, to fandoms.
My favorite word for that is affiliation. That's what Web3 does. I think fundamentally Web3 gives us a new tool to create affiliation between us as a developer, our content creators, and their fans. That's where its power is.
So there's not going to be any sort of gameplay advantage from buying NFT?
No
gameplay advantage?
That doesn't work.
Yeah, most of the first ideas that come to people when they think about the application of Web3 and crypto to games is like, cool, let's just do that. Let's financialize all these assets that we love. And I'm like, have you not been paying attention to video games for the last 20
they haven't. That's the thing.
I can pull up any number of articles about Diablo 3 Auction House, about any number of games that have tried to do this. And you can't just do that. That's not how it works. You have these two forces. You have the financial interests and the market forces. And then you have these assets and these items that you're designing for fun. And if you just bring those two things and smash them right together, it's a disaster. And that's not something that I'm speculating is a disaster. There is a history of that disaster happening in video games for decades. When we started getting drawn to this opportunity of Wildcard, not just as a competitive game, but as an ecosystem that brought together the competitors and their fans and the people tuning in to spectate, I turned to our team and I said, what if we realized that what the word we're using, which is players, wasn't just the people who installed the game? What if it was all the people who are showing up to enjoy this experience, whether they're tuning in on Twitch, YouTube, whatever, Twitter, whatever it is, if they're tuning in and because the reality of it is when I have conversations with those folks, like it's part of the League of Legends audience right now, and they're like, oh yeah, I love League. And they can tell you all about the meta and they can tell you about all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, but tell me about your competitive record. And like a lot of them are like, I haven't played in a while, but I tune into my favorite streamers and I follow along or whatever. So that's already happening. And I think the opportunity is if we're allowing ourselves to expand that definition of what a player can be, that's how we reach larger audiences.
Yeah. There's a lot of pleasure in watching sport or watching a game. Now, then tell me about calling a game, which you did, Paul, in the Malay on
he
the
does
Meeting.
it well.
I have no experience doing it.
You did do it well. You'd been practicing. Obviously, it wasn't your first rodeo. But
no, you hadn't. He hadn't.
He made me come to do rehearsals.
Okay, it was like twice. You had to do twice, and I didn't even give you any notes.
One thing that I want to challenge you on is that the game itself has, it has the underpass and it has a couple of
overlane and underlane.
Yeah. So how many different lanes are there?
It depends on how you consider it. I would say there's 3 lanes. There's the center lane, there's the underpass lane, which connects on both sides. And then there's the fling gate lane where you can send the creatures over the top and they land on the opponent's side. And
we actually have a creature that's going to have, this is the alpha for you. There's a creature that has one of those gates on its shell. And so there's actually a creature that has that and that can move around and do it that's coming out.
So one of the things that is going to be tough is that action can be in more than one place.
Yes.
And that's not like football. So tell me about solving that problem.
I will say that we have spent a lot of time on it. I was manually driving the camera during that match, and it's really not that hard for me to focus on the things that are fun and exciting that are happening at any given moment. It turns out they don't overlap that much, at least in terms of the things that matter, because there are 2 goals. There can be moments where there's like action happening on both goals, and in that case, it's fun to shift back and forth. We've also built like split screen presentations of that. But we've also been working on an AI driven version of this that is basically like measuring heat that's happening across the map and then choosing where to focus. There are other sports like this, like Olympics comes to mind, golf comes to mind, where you can have several things happening at once and you need to make a network broadcast call about what you're going to show at that moment.
So one thing, again, as I was watching this, that occurred to me was that there could be a tie-in with broadcast TV. Have you guys thought of that at all?
Oh, that's all I think about.
Exactly.
Yeah, going to do a deal with
my feeling has always been that, that if you have something that brings enough people together, other people are going to take notice. We already have entire generation of kids who are like, I want to be a streamer. I want to be a broadcaster. I want to do that. Now, the benefit and the problem with creating what is ostensibly like a new sport is the benefit is we don't have the cadre of managers and agents and attorneys and the NHL and the NBA and the leagues and whatever. That means it's a lot more work for us, but it also means that there's not the like extractive nature of all of those things. As of right now, if you take NBA Top Shots, like there's a very small profit margin that people can bring to this because there are so many layers that are already taking from that infrastructure of those things.
They're so used to the walled garden business
Yeah.
models truly have. You were asking earlier, the Web3 of Wildcard. I think that at the highest level, what we're most excited about is we realize that if we're successful in building a great game that has millions of players and is a competitive game like this, like none of this stuff works unless it's a great game.
Yeah,
So
none
and all
of it.
is like this caveat
Yeah.
that is implied, but it's definitely worth saying. But if we succeed at that, what we actually end up with in a traditional Web 2 sense, we end up with two businesses at once. We have the game and the IP, and then we have the competitive ecosystem or the esport which again, we don't get to define that Wildcard is going to be an esport. That's up to our community to decide. We just have to make a great game. But if it does work, traditionally, we would own both those businesses and all that profit and everything else would roll up to us. What we're most excited to do with Wildcard is to break those things apart and say, what if that second part is entirely owned by the community? What if the value of all those aspects, broadcast rights, league ownership, team ownership, commission, etc., is owned on the blockchain by the community?
We're also really weird capitalists, the two of us in general. So we realize that's not something that a lot of people come into a space like games and say, how can we redistribute wealth? But it is something that we talk about.
I just generally have observed as a business person and as a technology creator that most companies aren't willing to invent the thing that would put themselves out of business. Right? Even there's a few companies that are. Apple's really good at this. They invent product lines that put other product lines completely out of business. There's no more iPods because now there's an iPhone. Nintendo's really good at this. A few companies are, but most companies are like the Titanic, and they just, once they're headed in a direction, they're headed in that direction. And it provides an opportunity for another business to come along and say, you know what? If you guys were willing to carve off this piece of your business and use it to provide more value to your customers, probably all your customers,
we wouldn't have an opportunity anymore.
Yeah.
But they won't do that. And I think that's part of the opportunity that exists here for us.
Tell me about your experience building games, Paul, in terms of, you mentioned that you were pushing the border of innovation on games at several times. And I note that you were the creator of Words with Friends, which is a Scrabble-like game.
Larry David was the first person to actually say, it's just Scrabble.
Yeah.
No one else would
Yeah.
say that, even though we all were like, yeah, it definitely is.
Bend the Scrabble-like game, yes.
What I'm interested about is this long history you have of developing games and what that informs. You know, you decided that was mobile. At that time, that was mobile. Then you've had the VR experience. Now, that hasn't been adopted to the extent that mobile has. And now we've got Web3 here. So tell me, how do we know if Web3 is going to be more like VR or more like mobile?
We know whether there's 10 times more people playing it next year than there are this year, and 10 times the year after that. Ultimately, we need a time machine to answer that question, ideally. But what I want to say about this is, having now worked on and built games on multiple disruptive technology frontiers, it's not necessarily possible for us to predict which one of those is going to explode as the next frontier. I think one of the hardest things in being an entrepreneur is timing. And the opportunity that I think exists, for instance, virtual reality and mixed reality, it's definitely still happening. Just because it hasn't happened yet, it's definitely coming. And when it does happen, everybody will be making games for that, and everybody will be playing games on that, and we won't be using these little screens anymore. That's going to happen. When is that going to happen for Web3? My guess is pretty soon now. Is there a great Web3 game yet? A single one? No. And I'm not out here to bash it. I wouldn't be here having this conversation if it wasn't for titans like Axie Infinity and great games or great projects that have pioneered what's possible here. But the way I say this is, once we're done with this podcast, once I'm done with the day of work and I'm going to go sit on my couch and I'm going to go actually just enjoy myself with a game, am I going to pull up a Web3 game? No, none of us are. Not yet. I don't say that in a derogatory way. The reason I mention that is, what happens when that's not the case? Because there's nothing inherent about Web3 that is going to stop a great game from being made. So that moment is coming when finally there is a game that's as good as any of our favorite Web2 games that also just happens to be a Web3 native experience. What's that going to look like? Most of us speculate, I speculate, that once people experience what it is to be playing a game where you're not playing in someone else's walled garden, where you're playing in an open, distributed, decentralized environment where that value you're creating is not being extracted and held by another company, but is actually something that you own and can transact yourself with. As gamers, we won't want to go back to the other thing. It will look antiquated and out of date 10 years from now to think about going in and playing a game where you have to leave behind all the things that you got that were valuable in that game when you leave the game. Like, that's going to sound ridiculous to gamers 10 years from now, in my opinion.
So guys, tell me about your approach to fear, the fear that people have when you say, okay, sign in with your wallet now. They even know what that is.
Oh my gosh, we had to create like an educational, we did office hours with our community, because I think one of the things is to note is that this was the first time we've ever taken VC money. So before this, we have done any kind of raising from like locals. There are Texas people that have family like offices and they're investing. And so we have people who just video games alone, they're like, I don't know what you're doing, but I like you. So here you go. So onboarding them to make it to that place where they can like get a wallet and it's like sometimes it's like Paul has to go next door to my mom's house to help her with her internet.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I just think about the hoops that we as gamers are actually willing to jump through to get to the favorite parts of our games.
Oh
like, we will put 40 hours into something to get that one item or to have that one experience that we want to have in a video game. The problem is Web3 games up till now have done it, as you said in the beginning, they've been backwards about it. They've been like, hey, the first experience you're going to have is connect a wallet, buy this asset, and then the game and the fun will happen later. And it's like, what? No, of course gamers are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I'm not going to do that. That sounds horrible. But if you flip it around and you have somebody who's already having a great time in your game and they're already having a blast and it's super fun, and then there's this journey they can take of connecting a wallet and doing these things that can be more complicated, more advanced, but on the other end of that is something that they really want in a game they're already having fun with. I think that changes the discussion entirely.
Guys, it's absolutely fascinating. One more thing. What's next? What's coming up? Because I went to find your roadmap and your roadmap was all retrospective, which is probably wise. In my experience is that people never hit their deadlines in this world. But so what's coming up? Can you give me some sneak peeks?
What's happening next is seeing the vision for Wildcard that you got a glimpse of in this exhibition back in February, the Melee on the Meteor, which I'm proud to say we had 10,000 people, almost 10,000 people tune in live for that. So we were talking about some of the numbers that you guys had, and we've been quiet about the numbers of people that we had in Wildcard, but it's crazy how much people are actually into engaging with this. But it was just an experiment. It was just a glimpse of that. Our vision now is to see that come to life in increasing ways. The production quality, the experience of people showing up live to actually be in the arena while these tournaments are taking place in Wildcard. Our hope and our dream now is to have that be happening at the same time as we're finishing the game. Because we're in alpha right now and we're going to be heading into beta in a little while. And what Web3 gives us is the opportunity to bring the community along with that journey in a new way that we've never done before. So it's more of that. It's an expansion of that. It's now with our Wild Pass holders who get to be a part of that even more directly.
There's lore pieces. There's development of other champions that are coming, summons that are coming, where they come from, background. We see this as the potential for a lot of different linear storytelling opportunities.
I love what you were saying about how video games are now becoming the source of the beloved IP.
If you do it
world.
right, which is hard.
Because years ago, I turned to Katy and I said, that's what's going to happen.
No.
I know all most popular, and I'm like, it's going to be video games that are leading that charge later in our life. And the fact that we are seeing that happen, that we get to be a part of that, that I get to work together with my soulmate on that at the
He's
same
the
time. Like,
cheesy
it's just,
one in the
it's a dream come
relationship.
true. I don't know. Absolutely choose. But the other thing I wanted to mention is the most exciting thing happening for me right now is more people are getting a chance to play our game. The Wild Pass is the gateway to people now getting the opportunity and the access to play test. Every day I get to sit in on another one of these. I just had one right before this, sitting in with people who've never played the game before. And they're just expecting, as a Web3 game, that like, I saw a trailer, but everybody's got a trailer. I saw
Easy to make a
screenshots,
trailer
everybody's
these
got that.
days. Yeah.
Then they like pop in the game and they're actually running around and they're like, oh my gosh, you guys actually have a game. It's actually fun. Getting to have that experience now over the coming weeks and months with more and more people, that's what I'm most excited about.
Great. Katie, Paul, thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
Thanks
Thanks.
for having us.
There you go. That was Paul and Katy Bettner from Wildcard. Weren't they great? Please like and subscribe to our channel, and I'll see you next time.